guys, Matt, IronTrap Garage, giving you another little update on the free tee. So, as you guys may or may not know, Mike and I kind of work opposite schedules. So Mike works for the most part, a third shift job, and his days off are kind of not your normal Monday through Friday deal. And I kind of work with my daytime gig, a normal like 8 to 5 type deal, Monday through Friday. So a lot of times during the week, when we can, Mike comes through the middle of the day and he'll get a couple things done, and I will work in the evenings like I'm shooting right now. And so Mike's been working the past day or so here and there for a few hours at a time on the frame, welding up some of the holes in the frame to get all the old body mount holes and things like that, places where we blew the rivets out for mounts. Get them all welded up and kind of just ground smooth while I'm away doing the daytime job thing. He's working on that. And at nights I've been working on trying to get some of the metal work a little better on the car. Welded a ton on this car, so there's a lot of hammer and dolly work, planishing hammer, stud gunning, all kinds of stuff. And the metal on this car is less than optimal, I will say. The car had an old restoration, I use that word loosely, that was done to it, and there's a lot of spots in the car where there is rot, thinned out metal, etc., and as I start working it, I sometimes have to go back and cut out sections and weld new pieces in. So it's been taking a while. And I'm making a giant mess with all the tools on the ground. You can't see in this shot right here, but I have a giant mess right in front of me. When you're jumping back and forth between all the tools, it creates a big mess. So what I'm going to be doing is working on this side a little bit. I'm going to start working on this other side because I have the driver's side lower cow area roughed in half decent. I'm going to show you guys a couple of the tools that I've been using kind of extensively with doing this type of work. Maybe there's a tool that you guys don't have, or there's something that I use that maybe you don't know of, and maybe that'll help you guys. So I'll show you what I'm working on, and just give you an idea of kind of the process I go through when trying to straighten out panels. So some of my mess here, like they say, big mess, big success, maybe. And inside the car you can see I got a whole mess of tools. The mix of all this stuff is kind of what I've been using. So there's a bullseye pick, slapper, about 100 different hammers and dollies. Well, only a couple of, maybe 3 or 4 dollies, but probably like, I don't know, 10 hammers or something just to get into different areas to hammer and dolly. But you can see that I have a lot of stuff out, and it gets messy really, really quickly. Alright, so this panel over here has been just, it was welded quite a while ago. We welded all these pieces in, we welded in the door jamb, and I just kind of roughed it all in, sanded it half decent for what we needed for the videos, but it needs a little more work to get it just a little bit better before we start adding our body filler when we do the final body work. So right here in the weld seam, there's a bunch of just kind of small little low spots above or below the weld. This side isn't too bad as far as how much warping there is. There's a little bit right in here that needs to be addressed. And there is some ugliness up in here where the metal was kind of damaged from previously, in the car's life previously. But what I'm going to focus on right now is just working on either side of the seam. I'll kind of show you guys what I do there. So I have it, like I said, roughed in, sanded a little bit. But what I like to do is try and get there. Any of the big spots, what I'll try and do is work it with like a pick end of a hammer. So I have this one. Actually, my other ones, my favorite ones over here. So this guy. Alright. So I have this one here. It's got a little more blunt of an end on it. The one I have here is a little sharper, and then I have a really sharp one in the toolbox when I need to get a really, really fine area. But what you're doing with this is you're just picking up the low areas, so we know that right kind of next to the weld above, there are some low spots here that I can see. So what I will do is by hand. I'm going to use my heel dolly for this. I will get in, support the weld or support the panel, get in from behind here, and I'll kind of look, get an idea where it's low at, just above, and I will try and hammer. So what I'm listening for is when it goes from hollow to it's actually ringing, and already just in that area I can see I raised it a little bit. I'm not hitting really hard. That's another thing to mention if you guys are just kind of starting out doing this stuff. You don't want to swing it like you're trying to drive a nail into a 2x4. It's just light little taps, especially when we're using the pick end, because we don't want to do damage. If you hit too hard, you're going to actually stretch the metal and cause a problem. So I'm just trying to raise up the low spots. So I'm just working along the top of this weld seam. Alright, and I can already see I've got this worked up and raised just a little bit. I can work along here, do the same thing. And I can just work along that area and just keep raising up all these low spots using the pick side of the hammer. And then what I do, get a little further along, is you can also take your bullseye pick and you can put it in the panel here, and you can try and raise some of those areas up. With the bullseye pick. So I just go back and forth between them and work up any of these real obvious low spots. And then we can go back over it with some guide coat or machinist die and check it with a sander and see where we're at. Sometimes if you use an aggressive enough sander, you can just go over and it'll really quickly show you where the lows are. So I'm going to keep working that little area using those couple of tools, and then we'll show you once we get a little bit further along. So now that I got a little bit of the small areas raised up with the bullseye pick and then also the hammer and dolly with the pick end, I was able to work some of these areas around the weld up a little bit. But what I start getting is, between this car being quite old, me doing a bunch of work to it, and everything else combined, there's a lot of like just waviness to the panel where it's just a bunch of small inconsistent areas. Not like there's big hollows in the panel, there's just all kinds of little low spots and high spots. So what you can do, you can use a slapper, which I do quite a bit, one of these slappers and a dolly, and you can basically kind of planish the panel out by working around, slapping on the panel, and that works pretty well to get out a lot of the small stuff. It's labor intensive obviously, but it does work well. But what's nice is if you can get yourself a handheld planishing hammer like this one here. I have a couple different ones. This is an old Cornwell that I have, and the head rotates so I can fit it around the door jamb here, and then I can work it just by loosening a little pinch bolt. And you lubricate the panel up. I usually use Krill, which I use for kind of everything, between panel lubricant and also getting bolts unstuck. That's what I use. I'll spray it on the panel, and what this does is this just hammers really fast up and down, and it's just like with a slapper or a hammer and a dolly. It's hitting, and it's going to smooth all those areas out because it's moving really fast, and as you rock it back and forth from the panel, it's going really fast like this, and it's kind of smushing all the high spots down and kind of making everything consistent. You want the die in the back to kind of ideally match the shape of the panel. Now this old Cornwell hammer I have, I'm waiting on a lower die holder from Tin Man. He started machining little die holders that allow you to put the more common CP dies in the bottom. Right now I only have one original Cornwell die. It's kind of small. It works well because it is still kind of flat, but it's small, so it only does a small area. I'd like to have a slightly larger surface contact area on the bottom to smooth out some of this stuff. But it's working okay for now until I get that lower die holder. I just have to take my time. You have to be careful you don't hit the trigger too hard because you can stretch with these. So if you push the trigger all the way down, if you don't have a regulator on, you push the trigger all the way down, you can hit really hard. It's like swinging really hard a hammer on dolly. You can stretch the metal and get the panel out of shape. So what I'm doing is barely touching the trigger, and I have a full range that I can give it some more throttle. So if there's a low area or something that looks a little low and I want to raise it up, I can stay in that area, hold down on the trigger, and it's going to hammer really hard and raise that little spot up. I'm still learning this hammer. There's guys that are much better with a handheld planishing hammer than I am. But it does help speed up the work a little bit and get some of the ugliness out of a panel really quickly. So it just saves swinging the slapper or the hammer and dolly. It's nice if you can get a hold of one of these on the cheap. All the ones I have, I've bought for probably, man, under $100, under $50 at like old garage auctions or flea markets. I've had a bunch of them over the years, and I usually sell the ones. When I get a better one, I'll sell another one. I have two different ones that I have right now, and both of those, I think this one here I paid like, I want to say $2 for it at an old garage auction. My other one I paid at that auction where there was the 32 that we showed pulling out. One of the days of that auction I bought, I think, one with two different hoops for like 50 or 70 bucks. A lot of times these things sell for 600, 700, 1,000 and up, depending on the brand. So they are nice to have. It's a really handy tool to have. It's really quick, but you do have to respect the tool. If you are too aggressive with the air pressure or the hammering power, you can stretch the panel and cause more damage than good. So that's the next step of this. I'll run this over and work back and forth with the hammer and dolly and the pick and start introducing this, and that should start kind of getting everything a little closer to into shape. Alright, so now that I ran over everything with the planishing hammer, got it a little bit better, it's half decent. I really, at this point, it's pretty good. You could probably put filler over this whole thing and it would be what most of us, as I say, mortals would do, and it's completely fine. If you want to take a little extra time to get rid of some of the pits in like around welds, or if there's hidden areas, the one thing I'm fighting is I have box tubing that's in where this door jams kind of formed around, and the problem I have is there's some spots where it's kind of crappy in here where the metal shrunk a little bit and there's little low spots, or there's spots where the metal was a little damaged. I should have fixed it before I kind of built the whole door jamb, but again, I kind of didn't think the car was going to really be that nice. I was going to slap it together, so I wasn't really worried about that stuff, to be completely honest. And it was a mistake on my part. So now what I need to do is kind of go back and fix some of these little spots that are low that unfortunately now are hidden. I can't get a hammer or dolly. I can't get the planishing hammer in there to touch them. So the only real thing you can do is use just a stud gun. This is something that's used in the auto body collision industry, maybe not so much anymore now that cars are made out of mostly plastic, and everyone is taught how to just unglue and glue a new panel on. These are not used nearly as much as they used to be, but they are sort of a modern tool, but they are really, really handy. There's also a kit that Eastwood sells where you can put a attachment on your MIG welder, and you can spot weld or plug, I guess you could say spot weld, the studs, these little studs, you can spot weld them to the body. It works pretty good. The only thing I don't like with that on this particular car, with how much I have to do it, it's a lot quicker than using this, less cumbersome, but with this style, I think there's a little less heat put into it. It's a little less grinding to take them off. These are kind of expensive, so if you can afford one, these are really nice. The Eastwood MIG version is a lot cheaper, a lot quicker, but it might take a little more grinding, which I'm trying to reduce here. So with this style, you can put the stud in here like that, and this actually, the tip here presses in, spring-loaded, and when you press this all the way in and this outer ring touches the metal, you hit the trigger, it's going to basically put like a resistance, it's going to resistance weld the stud right into the panel, and it's going to stick to the panel, and then what you can do is use a slide hammer. This style here, you basically loosen it, slide it on, and then you tighten it, and then you can use the slide hammer to pull out. It's really, really handy in some of this area around the door jamb where I have low spots where I welded it and I can't get to it now that it's hidden. I can at least pull those spots out, get them kind of roughed in so that we're not filling, you know, like 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch, you know, valleys in there. We can pull them out, so all we're doing is just kind of skin coating it. And that's really all I'm trying to do with this car. Not trying to do a full-blown metal finish. Really, that's kind of the peak of my, the level of what I can do, and I don't think it's really worth it on this car anyways. So I'm just trying to get a half decent and not use a ton of filler. So we're going to do a bunch more stud welding, working around the jamb here and in here, and then we will be ready to move on to the, I guess you could say, next step. Alright, so another tool that I use when I'm trying to work out a panel like this is the shrinking disc. Now this is a stainless disc that comes in a couple different styles. This one here is the style that I like the most, that is smooth and just has the edges turned around it. They make ones that are kind of like rippled. They're sharp on the ends. I don't like them quite as much. No particular reason, I just like this one better. What these do is it's a flat, smooth stainless disc, and what it does is when you, like I was talking about earlier, when you have a panel that has all kinds of like just ripples or highs and lows in it, or maybe you have a panel where there's a bunch of damage and there's a spot that you have some oil canning in it. Like I have an area probably around right in here where it's not oil canning yet, but you can feel it's a little, the panel's a little loose in there just from hammering. I think what it is right in here. I probably worked the panel just a little too much with hammering and dollying and trying to get all the weld kind of worked out. So what it's doing is it's stretched out here and it's pulling the metal from over here, and there's more metal, you know, like over in here. So it's kind of pulling on the panel and making this panel over here kind of pop in and out, because I think this is kind of overstretched over here. So, hi. So what you could do is take the shrinking disc, and you can run this disc on a big sander, and you can run it over the panel, and what it does is by running this over here, it creates the friction of this panel, creates a little bit of heat, and it can be a little safer if you are careful with it and you practice with it. It's a little safer than doing heat shrinking with a torch, or sometimes I've done it with a TIG, where you heat shrink a small little area and then you hammer it out, and you can adjust it that way. With this, you can kind of run it over the whole panel, and you actually see it highlight all of the high spots. And what it'll do is, with all those little tiny high spots, it will kind of, those little high spots a lot of times are stretched out too much. So that running this over it will actually shrink those areas down. It'll pull them in, and it will make them level with the surface. And as long as you keep moving with it, and don't heat the panel up too much, you can basically just shrink down or knock down all of those high spots by doing that. Now, this isn't something that you're going to pull a big, like heavy low spot out that's like a belly in it. But if you have a little area where it's oil canning a little bit, or you can tell you've overstretched an area just a little bit when you're hammering, dollying, or even with the planishing hammer, you could take the shrinking disc and run over the whole area, and it will kind of shrink those areas that are a little high by running it over that. It's not quite as aggressive as doing a heat shrink with a gas torch, or like I said, with a TIG torch. or even you can do the shrinks with that stud gun like I was showing you guys earlier. With those, it's such a focused, fine little spot that works if you have a spot that's definitely stretched and it's really easy to tell. But if you're kind of unsure, you think there's a bunch of kind of messiness, you can run this over and it will kind of even it out. And like I said, it will also kind of show you where some of the highs and low spots are, and it will kind of blend them all out. It's like a final little thing you can do to run over a panel, but it is not a magic tool that's going to solve a smashed in panel. It's only good for when you get to this point where the thing's pretty smooth, but you want to just finish it out just a little bit better and get it refined just a little more. And that's what I do with this, this tool here. Alright, so I got this side a lot better. Now, it's not perfect by any means, and I eventually get to a point where there is a point of diminishing return, where I'm spending so much time nitpicking stuff that really doesn't matter for a car that isn't something that I want to be super high-end. So I kind of called it quits. There's still some pits and imperfections around the door jamb area that bugs me a little bit, but I know that once I put primer on it, put a skim coat of filler on, it will disappear and really quickly. So I gotta just keep moving on this car and just look past some of that stuff. So I got that all filled in. I'm having one little thing with this whole cowl area, now that I got it all kind of roughed in pretty good, is I wanted to leave this seam right here where the cowl top sits over the cowl sides, which is kind of just screams that it's an original car, that it's a steel car, and it's not a fiberglass car, because usually this is molded right into the cowl sides. From the beginning of building this car, I wanted to leave that there because it does scream that it's a steel car. But the more I look at it and I blend it in, the firewall, I'm starting to kind of wonder if it would look a little more finished if I did use some more silicone bronze and fill that all in. Kind of going back and forth on that. I think I will make that final decision when we put the stanchions on for the windshield. Mike found a really nice windshield with stanchions at Hershey for a really good price. So we are going to work on that really soon, and I'm going to make that decision at that time. If you guys have an opinion on it, I'd love to hear your input. Doesn't mean that it's going to sway me one way or the other, but I like to have the discussion in the comments. So if you guys, what do you guys think about leaving the seam there to kind of show that it is an old original, I guess it's old original car, over blending the seam in to make it look a little more finished. So now I got all this done, I can start working my way back. I even started working into the cowl sides just a little bit tonight before I ran out of time. And I'm just going to keep working my way back, and eventually we'll have a car that is free of major rot and damage, and repairs will be all pretty much done, and I cannot wait. That's all I have for this one. I appreciate you guys following along. As always, we do videos on Tuesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. If you like the videos, please give it a like. Definitely subscribe if this is your first time watching and you haven't subscribed. And share with your friends. We really like all the feedback that we are getting. Thanks, guys. Catch you later.